So without a doubt, Clair Obscur Expedition 33 has been a tremendous, triumphant success. Over the weekend, it actually hit all new player records and peaks. It peaked at 121,000 concurrent players, which is insane. Again, this game was made by like 30 people, and it's absolutely wild. It's absolutely wild that it just keeps popping off. It keeps popping off. They also announced that they hit 1 million sales, 1 million copies sold. And they specified that that does not include, specifically, this does not include any sort of Game Pass players. You know, you remember how there were recent games like AC Shadows where they said, we have X number of players and we're really excited about it. Like, it doesn't tell you a whole lot because like they have a subscription model. They could give out free codes. Like, you just never really know. But they are clearly stating 1 million copies sold. That's tremendous. That is a remarkable achievement. Again, with only 30 devs, that also represents a fairly tight budget too. I mean, this was not like a $500 million project, okay? There's a lot of $200 million games that would kill for player counts like this. And yet they struggle to achieve them. So it's been a remarkable success so far, certainly. And even if you, like, there's been some people that have tried to bring up like, oh, well, Game Pass is just cannibalizing its sales and stuff, which is kind of funny because on the one hand, like, I think a lot of people who talk about that don't know how Game Pass works. The general consensus is that most Game Pass licensing deals work with an initial payout to get on the service, and then you get paid based on the hours that players spend in the game. Because again, the whole goal of Xbox is to get people on the service, staying subscribed to the service and not canceling. So they want to pay devs more if their game is being played more. So games that have 100-hour runtimes are much more successful and much more valuable to Game Pass than a 2-hour game. It's why like Hellblade 2 is not really a very good Game Pass title for their business model because people can finish it in 5 hours and then you just cancel your subscription. That doesn't help them. They want you subscribed to this thing, using it for weeks, and it becomes part of your just routine. It becomes part of your loadout. In the same way that, you know, if you're sub to like Spotify, a lot of people just consider Spotify part of their monthly expenses. It's not seen as something that's like a splurge or a treat. That's just what they do. They're like, I like listening to music. I have to have my Spotify subscription. That's what it is. Same with like Amazon Prime or Netflix. Some people just build that into their budget. And Xbox wants to get to the point where people are building Xbox Game Pass into their budget as well. And you do that with big games that people connect with, and that becomes part of their routine. So big games are very valuable, but ultimately each deal can be different, and they're not going to tell us what the deal is, what the payouts are, what the contracts are. But you know who probably would know something about this would be the communications director and publishing manager for Pocket Pair, Palworld. Okay, this guy probably knows what he's talking about. And says, Expedition 33 is the latest game to get unwillingly dragged through the gaming Twitter as people debate the viability of Game Pass. I feel like I've just a little more knowledge on the topic than most, so I'll just say yes, it is very much worth having your game on Game Pass. It's just like, I don't understand why we have to debate over this. Maybe it's just like, you know, PlayStation fanboys who are upset that the front runner for Game of the Year is built in, no extra cost to Game Pass. Maybe that's why this is stirred up. But I've seen a fair number of people that are trying to twist it as like, yeah, they made a mistake going to Game Pass, that they're losing out on a ton of stuff. I don't think so. It's very possible that they actually are making way more money having the game on Game Pass, because you're assuming if they weren't on Game Pass, every single person playing it through that platform would buy it at 45. And I don't think that's a true thing. I don't think that's a given. There's a lot of people who play games through Game Pass that would not have bought them otherwise, that would not have paid the money up front to try it. They download it on Game Pass because it lowers the barrier to entry. It gives them a chance to try it. And so that would have been a $0 customer spending no money if it were not on Game Pass. But because it's on Game Pass, if they get paid out $1 an hour that you're playing, or 75 cents an hour, whatever the payout is, that's more than they would have gotten otherwise. And because it's all digital, there's no overhead cost with sending out physical copies and stuff. So it's just extra money that they would have left on the table otherwise. And that's where the business model really makes sense, because Game Pass often represents a portion of the gaming industry and community that is much more sensitive to price and they are less likely to buy games at full AAA pricing. And that's sort of a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, it means they'll try stuff much more easily. They'll just download it to give it a shot if it's on Game Pass. But it also means that they're not willing to spend premium prices on games the same way like PlayStation players are. PlayStation players are much more willing immediately to spend full AAA pricing. Same with like Switch players, because Nintendo has built this ecosystem around never putting stuff on sale and keeping it at max price and stuff. So it gives and it takes, certainly. But I think anybody that knows what they're talking about says it's pretty clear that this was a
Musicus donated €11.99 through Super Chat.
Thank you.
I don't understand the hype around Game Pass. I hate how Netflix decides what I can watch. As someone who plays older games, I don't see appeal to a Netflix for gaming.
Well, and that's why I think there was a Phil Spencer interview relatively recently where he said, no, like Game Pass is not the perfect business model for every single person. It's just not, which is true. You know, it's the same thing. Like if your business is selling high-end 8K Blu-rays of movies, that's going to be an amazing value to a lot of people that love cinema and cinematic quality film. But it's not for everybody. For people that are watching the movies on their phones, Netflix makes more sense, you know? And so it may not be a solid business model for you, but for a lot of people who are more budgetarily constrained, it's perfect. Like I know for me, if Game Pass existed when I was like in the early years of college, when I had no money, it would have been a godsend. It would have been amazing to be able to play all of these games and not have to spend $70, which I did not have. And that's why for a lot of people, it's a phenomenal value. It's a fantastic offering. It's not for everybody, but the industry is a lot bigger than any one person. And I think, you know, it's important to remember that, because yeah, for me, buying a $70 game, not that big of a deal. There are many, many millions upon millions upon millions of people for whom that is a massive deal. And they're not going to just put that money up guessing that the game is going to be good or hoping that the game is going to be good. You know, they're going to be more precise, more careful and methodical with what they choose to play. That's why, you know, the best solution, put it on everything. Put it on everything. Do it that way. Like, if you want to buy the game outright, buy it on Steam, buy it on PlayStation, buy it even on the Xbox store if you want. If you want to be subscribed to the like Game Pass offerings, Game Pass Ultimate or whatever, you can do that. Maybe what some companies have done is they release it for full price as a standalone purchase, and then they bring it to a subscription service that is more budget friendly later, like a month or two later. That's a solid way to do it. But I think putting games in more places for more people to enjoy them is always a good thing. You know, I think it's really weird when people are arguing for less players to enjoy games. I'm mainly interested in the industry as a whole, and keeping the industry healthy means keeping these games in front of people and getting people to play them. And I want more players to be able to experience something like Clair, Obscur. And I think, you know, distributing them in these highly varied ways is good. And I mean, it's pretty clear that Expedition 33 and the devs behind it, Sandfall Interactive and Kepler, the publisher, they're all very, very pleased with how it's going. They're very pleased. So without a doubt, I think it was a solid get. I'm still shocked that they managed to spot the potential in Expedition 33 and partner on it, because historically Xbox has not had a great track record with picking winners and losers when choosing like which projects to double down on. But this was a solid one. I still think it's bizarre that they released Oblivion like 2 days before this came out, which is also kind of weird, because it makes me pause and wonder if they thought Expedition 33 wasn't going to be that big of a deal, which is also kind of funny. But who knows? I don't know. They should be pleased it's Game of the Year. Yeah, I mean, I think at this point it's the front runner. There's a lot of other big games that are still coming out. Absolutely. Like, you know, we've still got Doom. Of course, GTA is expected to still come out. Ghost of Yotei, Mafia. I mean, there's still a number of Death Stranding 2. There's a number of very big name games that are still coming out through the rest of this year that I think could be contenders. But I think, you know, when I think to the Game Awards, I still think that the most likely outcome is Expedition 33. I think it pretty much leapfrogged over everything pretty quickly, because I think also a lot of these like gaming journalists and stuff that will be voting on it want to give kudos to the small team that represents creativity, that represents overcoming corporate boondoggling. I don't know what that even means, but it felt right. You know, I think that that's great. Former Ubisoft devs, a lot of them are. Like the guy that headed up Sandfall Interactive, his last game, if you looked on his LinkedIn, was Ghost Recon Breakpoint. And then he made this. Just think about that for a second. Think about that for a second. But it shows you the talent is there. It's why I've always said, like, you can't just whittle these companies down into like, it's just Ubisoft. Ubisoft sucks. No, there's a lot of talent in these studios. Phenomenal talent. And you can see what happens when they get out to make their own thing without the corporate constraints, without the pressing micromanagement. They make or at least sometimes they're very capable of making masterpieces once they break free of that mold, once they break free of that pressure. They just have to be allowed to do it. And I think the struggle for companies like Ubisoft, EA, Take-Two is, how do you empower the devs to make this while they're still owned by Ubisoft, while their project is owned by Ubisoft? How do you do that? And they've obviously not cracked that code. Some companies have, you know, I think, you know, Bethesda in the mid 2000s into the early 2010s, they pretty clearly knew how to do it. CDPR, I think, has figured out how to do it, how to harness dev talent while still utilizing it in a project that's owned by the company. But that's been a huge struggle for Ubisoft, EA, Take-Two, everything Embracer Group has done. Like, it's very, very tough. It's very tough. So too much micromanagement. Well, and it's just layers of bureaucracy. It's layers upon layers upon layers of approvals. Oh, I had this idea. What if we put, just like I showed you a minute ago, what if we put like a little meme in there where we have a Gestrel that's surrounded by fire and his house is burning, and you talk to him and all he says is, "This is fine." A call back to that meme. Like, what if we did that? Just like in this clip from, hold on, my mouse keeps clipping, from Stella. You would think they'd just be like, yeah, add it to the game. Sure, just add it to the game. But instead, this would have to go through 5 layers of approval. So, well, we have to check with legal real quick to make sure that doesn't step on any toes. And then we also need to check with our cultural sensitivity team, because we want to make sure that it's not offensive to have a character burning in a house that's kind of like a hut-like structure like this. We don't want to be insensitive there. We also need to look and see if we can afford the time to have a dev spend an afternoon on this. Sounds like a lot of work, so we'll do that. We'll bring it up in the Friday meeting, and then we can circle back to it on the Monday morning meeting. And then all of a sudden, this one little idea turns into a huge ordeal, when in reality, if you have a smaller team of like 30 people, they can just be like, oh, well, no, I'll just put it in real quick. Hey, dude, I had this idea. you know, I won't even tell you. I'll leave it as a surprise. I'll just put it in the game real quick. And then they do it. Oh my God, I love it. Keep it. Like, that's all this was. It's just a small team that's putting something together they're passionate about, but they're flexible and dynamic enough to do it. And I think that that's the big thing, is a lot of these massive companies, they just are not dynamic enough to make big moves, quick moves, to do these fun little impulse ideas and things. And, you know, we'll talk more about it in a few minutes when we talk about AC Shadows, because there's some current discussion over kind of the aftermath and what happened with all of that. Because it's pretty clear that it was, in my opinion, I think they cut a ton of stuff because they were trying to get it out in time. And I think that pairs with another discussion we're going to have, which is Marathon, which pretty clearly is being rushed pretty hardcore. So we'll see. But anyway, Clair Obscur Expedition 33, you should absolutely go play it. It's phenomenal. I highly, highly, highly recommend it. And it deserves all the praise that it's getting. Absolutely. He took my thing.